What is going on, all you wonderful A-plusers out there? It is I, Stuart, here once again to give you guys another Stargirl review. This time, of course, we're going to be talking about Season 2, episode, I believe we're on episode number 8 now, Summer School, Chapter 8. So guys, man, this was an episode where it took a lot of turns that I did not see coming for this series. Also just didn't see coming at all in general. Like, you keep getting an idea of where you think the episode's direction is going, but then it takes a really dark turn in another area that you didn't expect them to go to. Even though when you kind of look back on the episode, you can definitely tell there was a bit of foreshadowing of some of the things that we were definitely going to be seeing at the end. But regardless, guys, this was an intense episode, and I'm really excited to talk about it and break it all down for you guys. So with that being said, this episode was focused on two characters mainly, mostly Rick and Beth. So for this, I think what I'm going to do is just kind of talk about the different characters individually, just because if I kind of go in a linear way of talking about this episode, it's going to have a lot of me going back and forth, which I would just prefer kind of not to do. So I think it's just easier for me to just talk about one character and then move on to the next one. So I'm going to start with Rick's story first, and then I'll move on to Beth's story afterwards. But yeah, so one thing I do want to get off the bat before I even start with that, though, is that this episode alone kind of not really ruins, but definitely takes away my theory that I had in the previous episode, the idea that Brainwave is still alive, living inside Yolanda's head, and that he is the one to essentially have taken complete control over her. Originally, that's what I had thought that they were basically building up to, but the reason I'm kind of taking that theory back is just because we don't really have that many episodes left in the season, and given what we see in this episode, we know how Eclipso really knows how to get into people's heads and tell them the exact thing they know that they don't want to hear. So what I really think happened throughout the entirety of the previous episodes, I do think all of that was Eclipso, that Brainwave is actually dead. Nothing of Brainwave actually survived and went into Yolanda's head. I think like maybe they're going to explain that the headaches that happened before Eclipso were just kind of headaches from feeling guilty, which is the thing that, can happen with PTSD from what I understand. So it would totally make sense that, the headaches weren't originally connected to Eclipso. They were actually just, from the trauma of having taken someone's life. But I feel like it just kind of like later on turned into basically when Eclipso knew this was like a thing that Yolanda was struggling through, he definitely knew how to use that against her, and basically kind of like how my theory is of how he just feeds on people's guilt. I feel like that's what Eclipso has been doing with Yolanda this whole time. Now, going on to Rick, one thing that I got to talk about that I thought was actually kind of sweet. There are definitely a lot of sweet moments in this episode for a lot of the darker turns that it takes. There are definitely some moments where you're like, oh, that's actually really nice. And one of those is the very beginning part with the same teacher who you keep thinking is only there for like a one-off appearance to be kind of an antagonist for Rick, as someone who just, kind of constantly puts him down, but then Rick constantly proves her wrong. But we see that's not her at all. She's definitely not a two-dimensional mean teacher there for the sake of being mean. We do see that she actually does feel extremely sorry for what she did. So she goes to actually, she like not only goes out of her way to apologize to Rick for what she said, even though she had already apologized, she straight up like gives him a whole like really cool brochure of different colleges and really encourages him, and then like also kind of implies that she was also heavily misjudged when she was his age, and college was kind of like her chance of really being able to start over. It really sucks because the scene is totally ruined by Rick's dad, and I don't mean like in a writing standpoint the scene's ruined. I mean like, just kind of the feel-good moment we had completely goes away the moment that Rick's dad steps out of the house, and we see that, much like Yolanda's parents, Rick's dad is just a terrible, terrible person. I mean, in this particular case, it's not like his biological dad, it is his stepdad or uncle also, and yeah, he's just completely discouraging Rick from even going to college. Not only does he insult the teacher and just tell her to leave even though she's literally done nothing wrong, but then he immediately like tells Rick, oh yeah, you're gonna go to jail before you ever go to college. Father of the year right there, am I right? So we have like a really cool moment though afterwards where Rick is, continuing to feed Solomon Grundy, but we actually see that they do kind of spend some time together here and there. We see that Rick kind of, uses Solomon Grundy to talk about things that we don't see him talk about with his other friends, about his home life, and feeling like he does so much for the community, but the community never really does anything for him in return. And, I love how even though Solomon Grundy, he doesn't really know exactly what Rick Tyler is saying, because clearly Solomon Grundy doesn't like actually speak English that well. He can tell that he's upset and therefore tries to comfort him. And it's kind of interesting because Rick in the same scene also kind of uses a metaphor, for when he was young, his uncle got like this dog that he trained to be a fighter, and Rick essentially gave that dog to a different family, one that actually just wanted a dog that they could care for, while telling his uncle that his dog just ran away. He went to visit that dog a year later, and that dog turned out to be extremely nice and extremely different, dog altogether. And it's kind of like he looks at Solomon Grundy the same way. Like Solomon Grundy isn't necessarily born evil. It's just that you have the wrong people telling him to do the wrong things. And with Rick, kind of treating Solomon Grundy with respect and love, that's what makes Solomon Grundy so much more of a better person than he was in the previous season, where the ISA were controlling him and forcing him to basically kill people. So it's definitely a really sweet moment. And what happens afterwards is where the episode kind of takes like a bit of a dark turn, like at first. And you think at first this is all going to be like some misunderstanding, and then at the very end, even though I expected there to be consequences, I didn't expect the consequences to be exactly what they were. But Rick finds out that there's hunters going after Solomon Grundy, and so he goes back into the woods in order to try to save Solomon Grundy. And this is where he finds out that one of the hunters tells him that Solomon Grundy apparently captured a little girl and possibly killed him. And he doesn't believe this at first, because he's like, no, Solomon Grundy's not that kind of a person. And he also calls in Courtney and Pat for help. And here we get like some it's interesting when you watch the episode again, because a lot of the things that are definitely kind of implied, you kind of miss, even though like they're definitely there to kind of foreshadow a bunch of things later on in the episode. One of those things being that from Rick's point of view, we see him following the gunshots for Solomon Grundy. We even hear him following the sound of Solomon Grundy's roar. But the entire time we see Pat and Courtney there, they're mentioning that they don't see any hunters, they don't hear any gunshots or anything like that. But they do end up coming across Rick Tyler. And here's where they both see the same dead girl in the lake, kind of like making us think that this isn't a trick by Eclipso, that this is actually a dead girl that, was killed by Solomon Grundy. And then it's here we get like the reveal, but unfortunately the reveal comes in a bit too late, after Rick has already left the scene trying to go after Solomon Grundy, realizing that he has to kill him at that point, when we find out that the dead body is actually still alive, very much so, and that it's actually Eclipso the entire time. And like most of the hunters, we find out, or probably all the hunters, I actually don't even think there were any hunters in the woods to begin with. All that stuff was just illusions that Eclipso had put onto Rick Tyler in order to completely get him to believe that Solomon Grundy actually killed someone. And then also on top of that, you got to look back on how in season 1 Rick was the one who let Solomon Grundy go, and so you got to imagine that if Solomon Grundy kills someone, that's going to be blood that Rick is going to feel like it's on his hands. Like he's going to feel just as responsible for that person's death, because he's the one that didn't really do anything about it. So there's that big emotional heavy weight on him. And the fact that he really trusted Solomon Grundy after this whole time. He thought that Solomon Grundy just needed, some love and affection, and, realizing that wasn't enough, realizing that Solomon Grundy is just a pure monster, that completely breaks Tyler as he goes after him. But of course, not knowing that this was all a trick by Eclipso, and that Solomon Grundy has still yet, as far as we can see, to do anything actually wrong on his own. So as Rick goes after him, we got Courtney and Pat like tracking him down, and unfortunately when they get there, the fight has already begun. Rick is already like just completely wailing on Solomon Grundy using the hourglass. And this is where the episode takes a really dark turn, because we see Pat and Courtney trying to get him to stop, and he's refusing to listen to either of them. And earlier in the episode, it had been explained that the cosmic staff had only had enough juice for like 1 or 2 blasts at the most, and so Courtney really needed to make it count. amount. So she ends up using it on Rick, and here is where we find out that the person he was beating on wasn't Solomon Grundy, but rather his stepdad. Very similar to the Injustice storyline from the video game Injustice, where Superman ended up being under, like, I believe it was Scarecrow's toxic gas, and therefore thought that Lois Lane was actually Doomsday, and so he ended up just absolutely wailing on her, completely believing that she was Doomsday, and so he ended up destroying a chunk of Metropolis, along with completely tearing Lois Lane apart. And that's what this part totally reminded me of, is that it definitely reminded me of that Injustice storyline, where now, like, you got Rick doing the exact same thing, except for instead of to Lois Lane, it's to his stepdad, I guess uncle or slash stepdad, whatever you want to really call him. But regardless, though, it's definitely a really dark moment, and it's followed by Rick, of course, responding by, like, completely just destroying the hourglass, seeing, like, the damage that it can really do when used on just like a regular person, and seeing how his uncle may not even survive the injuries that he's been given to him. So it ended up taking a turn, and what I actually kind of thought was interesting here is that, I didn't know whether or not they were going to try to cover this up, whether Rick was going to go on the run or anything like that, but instead he actually just stays for when the cops arrive and just, lets himself be arrested. And, it definitely brings up that line of dialogue that his dad said earlier, the idea that you're going to go to jail before you ever go to college. And it sucks how much that ended up being true at the end. And, all because Eclipso knew exactly how it was exactly what he needed to do to break Tyler. Excuse me. Essentially, he just knew exactly what he needed to do to break Tyler, and unfortunately, it worked for Eclipso's favor. Most of the episode for Pat and Courtney, it's really interesting because we're so used to Courtney kind of being the one who does a lot of the stuff and how the story usually revolves around her, but in this particular case, there's not really much that she can do because the cosmic staff is still very powerless. As we even saw in this episode, she was only able to get one blast out of it, and she had to use it against Rick because of Eclipso's just power, having effect over him. And Pat, of course, we know that Stripe isn't fully repaired yet, although we see in this episode that it's getting close. Like, I'm sure it could technically run if Pat really wanted it to, but of course, knowing Pat, he wants to make sure it's running at 110% capacity. He doesn't want anything kind of going wrong with this. So in a way, they both kind of do feel useless throughout the episode. Courtney feels like there's nothing she can do, and Pat, kind of mentions that he knows exactly how she feels, not just because of what's going on with his Stripe outfit, but because of what happened, back when he was on the JSA, and he was kind of the member that didn't really get to do that much. So there's definitely like an interesting parallel between the two of them, and we don't really see it until now. Like, once we see Courtney not being able to help out the team the same way that she wants to, we really do see those parallels between the two of them really play out. So now that we talked about Rick's storyline, let's move on to Beth's storyline, because Beth, much like Rick, was also having to deal with Eclipso, but whereas Rick was a little bit more of a mystery, here it's a little more upfront that she's dealing with Eclipso right off the bat, and I think that was kind of like what the intention was. They wanted us to know that Eclipso was messing with at least one of them, which I think is what kind of helped with Rick's storyline, because we didn't really get that it was Eclipso that was behind the whole thing up until like the very end of the episode. And I think that was why they had Eclipso messing with two people, to really show like how powerful he is, how he can mess with two different people at the same time, but also because we as the audience would just kind of assume that, if we're seeing Eclipso physically mess with Beth, then clearly it's not him that's messing with Tyler, it's just everything's going wrong for Tyler. But of course, then we find out towards the end that that's actually not the case, and that Eclipso is definitely the one messing with both Tyler and Beth. But with Beth, you can kind of see that Eclipso has slightly underestimated her. It kind of feels like he puts a lot more effort into a scheme against Rick Tyler, just because maybe Eclipso just kind of saw Rick as the biggest threat due to the fact that, with Yolanda no longer being Wildcat, he probably doesn't see her as a threat. Courtney's staff not working, doesn't see her as a threat. And then just, Tyler being the only one with actual powers currently working, I feel like maybe Eclipso saw him as the biggest threat that he needed to take out first. And so therefore, having him arrested arrested was probably like the easiest way to do so. With Beth, it feels like he thought that the only thing he really needed to do with her was kind of break her mentally, thinking that that would just be an easy task for him. And this is why we see him getting kind of a little more sloppy with his plans when he when he tries to really break Beth down, because rather than using people that she already knows to like kind of tell her that she doesn't belong, he ends up using like Bruce Gordon, the character we've seen him like kind of disguise at throughout the entire season so far. But before I get into that, I definitely got to talk about the very beginning of this, because, you know, it definitely goes in the exact direction I kind of expected it to, in terms of, you know, the way Eclipso uses her parents to completely mess with Beth by making her think that they're having like the talk that they've been talking about having all season long about the divorce. And throughout this whole scene, they're essentially what you get are Beth's parents kind of saying that, yeah, Beth is the reason that they're getting divorced, that they used to be in love, but then the moment they had Beth as a child, the romance kind of was taking out of it. So they're both basically blaming her for why the divorce is even happening to begin with. You know, definitely something that I feel like a lot of kids that end up having parents who go through divorces end up always kind of feeling deep down, even when they tell them it's not your fault. You know, I feel like a lot of kids end up having that fear deep down. And so it definitely takes that really dark turn within this episode. And of course, we as the audience get right off the bat that this has to be Eclipso. But of course, for Beth, she's not sure how much of what she's seeing is real and how much of it is Eclipso. So when she ends up going to Courtney's house, she does put it together pretty fast that there's the little kid, Bruce Gordon, that keeps messing with her the entire time. And based on just some of the cruel things that he's saying to her, she puts it together pretty fast that it's definitely got to be Eclipso that's messing with her, that it's not actually, you know, this random little kid just staying inside Courtney's house. And again, it kind of goes to the fact that I just think Eclipso was a little bit too overconfident with this plan of just trying to break her mentally, because he doesn't bother really trying to hide the fact that he's Eclipso. He just kind of like uses one racial slur after another, and then also, not to mention, a bunch of sexist slurs as well, like telling her that her being a woman of color, you know, just makes her not belong in the JSA. And yeah, it is kind of interesting, because you look at the JSA, and before the new generation of the JSA with Courtney and Yolanda and Rick and Beth, the JSA were mostly white males, and so it makes sense that this would be like an insecurity Beth would have like kind of deep down in her, and that Eclipso would try to use that against her. Now, the big thing that Eclipso doesn't count on is that Beth has, you know, we look at the kind of small town that Beth is living in, and we look at how like every time we're at the high school, you know, it is a very predominantly white high school, so you gotta assume this isn't like the first time that Beth has had to deal with this kind of stuff at all. So with that, I feel like that's kind of the biggest thing that Eclipso kind of underestimated, is that Beth has dealt with this kind of thing, and so she knows how to overcome it. And so she ends up overcoming Eclipso's mind games by just being extremely proud about who she is. And, you know, she even uses her intelligence to realize that Eclipso trying to put her down means that Eclipso can't physically harm her, that the only way he can harm her is mentally, and that's how he'll be able to kill her. And so the trick to fighting Eclipso is to just, you know, not be afraid of him. And this kind of goes back to my theory that I've been bringing up about Eclipso, which is I don't think that he feeds off of people's sins. I think he feeds off of people's guilt, or just people's overall hatred of themselves, like self-hatred in a way. And I think that's what he thought he was going to be able to do to Beth, is get her to be very self-hatred about who she is. But with Beth being as strong as she is mentally, she is able to just express about how absolutely proud of who she is, and that ends up being enough as far as we as the audience can to see. It ends up being enough for her to completely get rid of Eclipso, at least get Eclipso to stop those mind games on her. Something I also thought was kind of cool about this is that in the same episode, we end up getting a lot of JSA members, like the original JSA members, throughout Beth's like kind of vision that Eclipso is giving to her, and we have them being the ones that tell her that she doesn't belong in the JSA. But when we cut back to kind of her overcoming Eclipso's mind games, we end up seeing her having a chat with Dr. Midnight, the original one, because once again, the goggles are able to connect with the original Dr. Midnight. And here he, he doesn't say it directly, I should say this, but he does kind of express kind of with his tone that he's really impressed that Beth was able to overcome Eclipso's mind games, kind of implying that this isn't something that happens very often, that being able to overcome Eclipso is something that it really takes a lot of hard and strong will in order to be able to do. And I like how it's kind of like that moment where Eclipso says that you're the one who overcame it, the goggles had nothing to do with it. I like how that was the moment where Beth was able to extremely proudly announce to him that, yeah, I'm the new Dr. Midnight. And I love how we also don't have Dr. Midnight say anything against that. Obviously this is where she kind of loses connection with him, unfortunately. And it's something kind of interesting. I am kind of wondering if maybe Eclipso has to be like having some physical appearance within the real world, like he has to be kind of messing with other people in order to bring that connection to make it stronger. But it is something that, at least Beth knows that the person that she's talking to on the other line is for sure Dr. Midnight and not just another vision that Eclipso's been giving her this whole time. So it is something that we might see her work extra hard now in order to try to fix. And speaking of working extra hard, I gotta give props to the kind of speech that her mother gave to her at the very end, because you have her mother coming in knowing that something is really bothering her, and then Beth kind of saying, have you ever felt like you don't belong? And then her mother knowing immediately what she's talking about. And I love the speech that she gave her, saying that, yeah, it sucks that we have to end up working extra hard, but we're the kind of people that can do that. This family works hard to get where we are, to show other people that we can do it. And just the way she kind of delivered those lines and just kind of that really sweet moment between the two of them, I absolutely loved. And it does show that despite the fact that her parents do get divorced, or we still don't know if that's how the season is going to end, but it does show that even if they do get divorced at the end of the season, we know it has nothing to do with Beth. And even though we kind of see in season 1 that obviously her parents did get kind of frustrated with Beth being slightly over clingy towards the two of them, we do see that the two of them really do care about her, and that, yeah, whatever it is that's causing the divorce has nothing to do with her. And it's just some parents just fall out of love with each other, and that's just kind of the way it is, unfortunately. But it was really nice for them to really assure Beth that she has nothing to do with them getting divorced at all. So definitely a very sweet way to end the episode between the two of them. There is one more scene that, of course, I got to talk about, which is that we get Mike and Barb, who we didn't really see them doing anything the entire episode. I mean, we got a little bit of a scene with them in the very beginning, but then we get to the two of them at the very end of the episode, and how, it's kind of the same thing that they've brought up before, how right now all they can do is just support Courtney and Pat. They can't really do that much more. And of course, the other thing is that they have to help kind of support each other, as both of them are kind of sitting on the sidelines currently. And I really do like that moment between the two of them, because we don't get very many Mike and Barb moments, but I do feel like the ones that we do get are genuinely really sweet. And despite them not being related, they do feel like a really nice mother and son duo. It's something that you really wish someone like Rick could have gotten. Like he could, you really wish he could have gotten a father figure, that could have treated him with as much respect as Barb treats Mike, or as Pat treats Courtney. So, it was definitely this episode, I kind of feel like I'm saying a lot of the same words, like sweet and dark, because this episode was like a little bit of both. Like, you had some incredibly dark moments in the show, like definitely some that are extremely dark even by like Stargirl standards, but then you had some really nice sweet moments to add a lot of levity to that darkness, kind of showing that there is going to be a light at the tunnel, hopefully by the end of the season. But then we got to talk about that last shot that we got, because we cut to an exterior of the house and we see the outside of the house starting to freeze up, kind of implying that it might be Cameron essentially finding out that they were the ones who killed his parents. Now, I don't know for sure if this is what it is. What I think it is, honestly, is, and this is all just based on what we've gotten in the last 2 episodes, I really do think this is just going to be another Eclipso episode, but this time the 2 victims of Eclipso are going to be Barb and Mike, possibly the entire family, because we might have Courtney and Pat there as well, but without a doubt, it's definitely going to be really interesting to see if this is actually Cameron or if it's Eclipso just kind of messing with them again. But another thing that we also do get in next week's episode, which I'm really excited for, is that it's supposed to have a lot of flashbacks. And during these flashbacks, we're going to be getting to see a lot more of the JSA members, and one of those being Jay Garrett from the Flash TV show. So I do kind of hope that they explain how Jay Garrett ended up going from Earth 2 to Earth 1, because, or I guess now it's called Earth Prime, because that's something that they kind of gloss over in the Flash, and they made it seem like he was always part of Earth 1, but we know that's not the case if they're saying that this is the exact same Jay Garrett that we're getting on Stargirl. So I'm really curious how they're going to basically be able to explain him going from one Earth to another, but still having the characters on the Flash not be able to know that there's a multiverse out there, because as far as the characters on the Flash know, the multiverse has been completely destroyed and there's only one universe left. But clearly that's not the case, as we're going to see in this episode. So I wouldn't expect them to have any big tie-ins with the Flash, so they probably won't actually end up explaining it through Stargirl. If anything, we might get an explanation during Flash's season premiere during Armageddon. But regardless, it is really cool that we're getting Jay Garrett to make a cameo played by the same actor, wearing the same suit that he wears on the Flash. So I am really excited to see that overall next week on Stargirl. But guys, overall, this was another really great episode. I mean, this season has just been absolutely killing it from beginning to end. There hasn't been a single episode so far that I don't like. And again, I think the show does an amazing job when it comes to just being able to balance a lot of the darker elements, but with some moments of really sweet levity. And then not to mention the fact that you have episodes that are just absolutely hilarious too. Something that I think a lot of the other CW shows really struggle with when it comes to their comedy. I feel like Stargirl has done such a great job of knowing when to be funny and then when to, take itself extremely serious. And when you're doing a superhero show, that balance can be a big struggle. But I think these last few episodes have shown that just because you have your funny episodes, that doesn't mean this isn't like a show that you can't take serious. And watching these last couple of episodes have really shown that. So overall, guys, this has been such an amazing season so far, and this episode is no exception. But guys, of course, at the end of the day, these are just my A+ opinions. We here at A+ Opinions always want to know what you guys think, so definitely let me know what you guys thought of the episode in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, but guys, above all, don't forget to keep it A+. I'll talk to you all later.
If you enjoy our content and want to be a part of helping our channel grow, become a patron supporter. We have affordable tiers to choose from that offer a variety of exclusive and early access content, from audio files for all of our shows for you to enjoy on the road, access to our Discord community, and plenty of reactions, reviews, character breakdowns, and more. Check us out at patreon.com/A+opinions. And as always, remember, subscribe, and hit that bell notification so anytime we drop a brand new video, you will be notified.